Hello and welcome to Sim.bc, the one place where I can go against the word of every, and I mean every, grown up on the planet. Exactly. What I mean is staring right into the light, right? Because you always hear them saying, don't stare up into the sun. You can get blind. And don't stare right into the TV. You can get googly eyes or squared eyes or something like that. And still we have VR today, so you know, that didn't work out kind of well. But anyway, here I am sitting talking to my own computer screen, right? And I'm looking right into a bright lamp. If that's good or bad, I don't know. Migraine is coming, you know, all the hype in the world. But anyway, let's get into today's discussion, mates. Because today we're going to talk about, if I just move myself around here, we're going to talk about different kinds of responses. No, we're not. We're going to talk about questions, but when talking about questions, it's interesting and crucial that we also discuss some manners of responses. How do you give responses? So today we're going to talk about you using response scales whenever possible. And just as someone pointed out in the comments yesterday when I kind of teased this, right? This is more about when you're having a survey, not when you're necessarily standing and talking to an audience, right? So if you're a lecturer, you have an audience, this probably won't apply to you. This is more like if you have a survey that you need to do and you need to conclude answers and you need to collect answers from these people or from participants, then this is going to be a good video for you, because this is going to help you with how you can formulate the answers to different questions. Anyway, with that out of the way, we're going to start off with recapping soon this is like accumulated to a page here. Anyway, with stuff that we've done to the previous videos so that you're up to speed, so that you know what we're talking about. Tips and tricks for making an in-between question that is not too hard and not too easy and is interesting to your audience. As we have stated a countless number of times at this point, we know that people tend to drift both in and out of conversation when not feeling engaged, which makes them having a harder time understanding the context in which a question is asked, and hence making that question a harder experience, even though it necessarily might not have been a more hard question. It might have been an easier one according to everybody else in the room. So asking necessary questions in order to keep audience engagement is one thing, but it also needs to be kept short and simple. Not short in the sense that it's a short discussion, but rather that the question takes 15 to 30 seconds to formulate and not 10 minutes. And simple, not in the way that it should be an easy question, but in the sense that it should have an objective to answer instead of 15 different ones. Ask direct questions, not aggressively direct, not abstractly indirect, but direct enough so that the audience knows what your answer that you're looking for is, because if they don't know, then well, they might think that it's either excessively hard or too easy based on this miscommunication that you have between the speaker and the subject, the audience. Then posing one question at a time can help you as a lecturer to control the development of the discussion while simultaneously engaging the audience through their own interaction in the form of answers. Plus, since the discussion will be broken up into different voices taking part, it's less likely for someone to drift out or completely fall asleep during a presentation of a subject. Avoid leading and biased questions. No matter how much it can gain you personally, it generally does not benefit the group. This approach might close out future perspectives that otherwise could make the discussion better and more vibrant. Remember to speak your respondent's language in order to not alienate a part of your audience and make everyone feel engaged. Rather that you introduce new terms during the course of the session than being unsure if they know it from before. Sometimes people will think that this is boring, sometimes we will add a different twist to the term and spark an interest. This part is really hard and is unfortunately only gained through trial and error and error and error and error. Anyway, mates, I really thought I was going to go through that quite quickly, so I hope that you didn't fall asleep over the course of that time. But now we're going to talk about scales whenever possible. So using scales whenever possible. And yet again, this is more about survey questions than you standing in the room, right? Having a presence in the room and saying, today, in order to answer, you're going to use scales. Even though, you're just going to state this kind of quickly, you can use scales because you can say, you can use a pain scale, for instance. You're asking the subject, you're asking the audience, how do you feel right now? What is your interpretation of this? On a scale from 1 to 10, on a scale from good to bad, how is your feeling in the classroom right now? How is your response? However, this is more common when using surveys, because on surveys you sometimes don't want to, well, you sometimes want them to think about where they're putting their answer, because if you only have a 1, 2, 3 answer kind of thing, then they might, or an ABC for that matter, or 1 cross 2, whatever you're using, right? People might tend for going for a 1 cross 2, 1 cross 2, 1 cross 2. 1 cross 2. No matter the question, and your entire survey you can just throw away because it will be, well, kind of unnecessary, right? So in order for you to make a question that is not too hard and not too easy on a survey, on a piece of paper, even if you're a lecturer and giving it out to your audience, right, in order to, you know, fill these in and we will use them in the next session, you need to make, or you don't need to make, but a tips is to use scales whenever it makes logical sense. Yet again, it needs to make logical sense, otherwise people are going to look at the question and just be like, why do I need to use a scale for how much a train costs when it is a fixed price? It's not my interpretation of the cost, it's just a train cost, right? So you shouldn't use it when it doesn't make sense, but use it whenever it is possible to use, because this will make people engaged. They will make them feel like, oh, do I actually like it, or do not like it? Do I like it? Do I not like it? Do I hate it? Do I not hate it? Do I love it? Do I not love it? Why not? And they will be more reluctant to say yes or no, or I love it, or I dislike it, based on that this is going to be a reflection of their own opinion. So hence they're going to read the question and then think about it, think about the question, actually taking it in, actually making a small analysis of their own, a small reflection on their own before giving the answer, because this is yet again going to reflect back on themselves, because they probably put their name on the top, so this is going to be connected to the student. Even though you're probably going to say that this is not going to be connected to you personally, we're not going to disclose any personal information. This is just going to be used in a quantitative manner. That could be the case. You can also try and make a quantitative analysis from the surveys, but that is not what we're here to talk about. But yeah, use scales whenever possible. And when you're talking about scaling, there's the different kinds of scaling. There is the graphic rating scaling, where you basically use a slider or some sort of slider in order to say, are you satisfied or are you not satisfied? Maybe it is very unsatisfied and very satisfied on the two different ends, and you can have such as like website, customer service, the overall experience. Maybe you simultaneously introduce the idea of when you're sliding, you're saying between 0 and 100, but you're using a slider in order to put yourself in between those two areas. That is one way of doing it. There is also the Likert scale, which is how satisfied are you with our service, and you can have very satisfied, unsatisfied, neutral, satisfied, and very satisfied, but you put in a cross in each of every box. But still, you're talking about how are you feeling. They still need to think about it. It's not just a 1 cross 2, 1 cross 2 answer. It's more like, how do you feel? And based on this, you can use this, what should we say, this dotted in version, because that's still the representation of how the audience is feeling. Semantic differentiation scale, or max difference. How satisfied are you with the following? And you can have least to most, and you can have a kind of a different amount of subjects down there, and like on the y-axis, so to say, and on the x-axis you have least and most, and then you can view how people, different people, right, are arguing for why something is the most why they're most satisfied with one thing and least with another in comparison to other people. And since you probably know your audience at least a little, right, you can evaluate what they chose in comparison to someone else. You can see how with their background they thought that this was their most satisfying point. Maybe they thought that ease of use was more important than size, but the other party here clearly thought that size was the most important factor from when saying why they're satisfied or not. So there are different kind of ways you can analyze this information through, but yet again, you're making it easier for the subjects to answer a hard question. Because if you have something like, what do you think? That is a very open, diverse question to start with. So what are you the most satisfied with? By presenting a couple of different answers here, you're going to make it easier for them. And by saying, what do you feel is the best? What do you feel is the worst? How did you experience this? You see what I'm saying? This will yet again introduce the reflection on themselves, so they will actually think about how did I interact with it, which is what you're actually after. But let's just say, for funsies, right, that you were instead saying, which one is the best, which one is the worst. Now, this will be completely unpersonal. People will just view it and be like, I don't know the answer. And since you had the same kind of broad, differentiated question going into this subject, people will be really confused. As of in relation to if people were actually analyzing every question because they were thinking, how did I experience it? And yet again, that is what you're probably after. You're after what they think, not what is the objectively best or worst thing, because if there is an objectively best or worst thing, you probably already know it. So try to formulate it in such a way that you will ask the person, what do you think? What what do they think, why not, and try to express it on the survey. And yet again, you can use this as a lecture. Yet again, you can ask people directly, what do you think about this? That's also kind of implying a scaling proportion answer matrix in a way, because you will say to the person in class, right, or at the work, you're as a manager, you're saying, how did you feel about this? Maybe if you're on an interview, how did you feel about this? Instead of saying, pick out the best and the worst part. Yet again, use this when it makes sense. You don't want to, as I stated in the beginning, say, how much does this train cost? What do you think? Maybe that's a way of saying it, but if there is a strict and objectively right and correct answer, what difference will it make if people give their own opinion about what it is? And I know this, I'm trying to make a point here, but I'm kind of disclosing another point in the same time. And of course you can say, how much do you think that this is supposed to cost, because then you're saying, how much is it supposed to cost? How much do you think this costs? Because that will make a reflection of what the societal idea of how much this cost should be, right? If they say higher than this, then perhaps you can raise the price. If you say lower, then well, you should probably lower price in order to stay in business. That's not what I'm saying. Okay, I realize now that I was probably a very bad example of what I was trying to say, but what I'm trying to imply here is that if there is one concrete, objectively correct answer, and you're saying, what do you think, or something like that, and you're using a scaling system from best to worst when there is one right answer, that probably doesn't work. So yet again, apply scaling as much as you can, but apply it when it makes sense. And yet again, this is a good way to end on this. This is a good way of making a very open, diverse, and, well, hard question seems less complex. Or make an easy question become more complex, because you're not only asking what of these objects do you like, you're asking what of these objects do you like, and which one were you the most satisfied with and which one were you the least satisfied with, introducing this new level of complexity. And if it's something that's really hard, the audience can always back on that, well, it's just my opinion, right? It's just what I think. So that was everything about the scaling from me today, mates. Tomorrow we're going to take a look at avoid using grids or matrices for responses, and that's kind of going to be the opposite of today's video, yet again looking at a kind of a survey twist on the entire questionnaire idea here. Well, that was everything from me today, mates. If you think that I wasn't as energetic as, well, usual, then that is probably because I've been recording so much music, because I have all these ideas in my head that I just want to get out. I want to have them on paper, I want to have them on recordings, right? I want to do this, and that takes lots of energy. I'm sorry, mates. The drawback of having this daily upload schedule is that some days you're just not up to it, but you have to perform anyway. Am I right, mates? Am I right? Anyway, see you tomorrow. Have a nice one.